Hello there, Grateful Gang. It's Lauren Blanchard-Zaleski here. Welcome to Gratefully Living the Chronic Life. I come to you every Thursday night live at this time, and I bring you different topics and experts. And we've got a fantastic guest tonight that help us to live lives of joy, intention, purpose, and gratitude. And I have a group on Facebook called Attitude of Gratitude with Chronic Pain. So many of us are watching from inside the group. If you're not a member and would like to join, we would love to have you. And this goes for anybody with chronic physical and or emotional pain. We serve all kinds of pain, but we focus on building resilience, which is the topic of our show tonight. Linda Graham is going to be here with us, and I'm super excited to have her here. But we focus on different coping tools and techniques to help us to be more resilient with the struggles of life. So before I bring her on, just a couple of things. If you are in Attitude of Gratitude with Chronic Pain, you know we hit a milestone this week. We hit 7,000 members, which is kind of amazing. We have this chronic pain group where you can't actually talk about your chronic pain. You're here to talk about gratitude and coping. So we have the 7,000 members. So it's very humbling. And thank you to all of the members who are currently members and have been for a while, and for you, all of you new members as well. We're getting a lot from South Africa lately, which is very, very exciting. We have if you are a member of AOG, we have a November Journaling Club challenge coming up. That is very exciting. So make sure you join our journaling club. What else needs to be done? We have a new creative writing club starting on November 1st. So lots going on in the group. If you're looking to find the group, let me put the name up again. It is Attitude of Gratitude with Chronic Pain. And to find out more about me, my website is gratitudeaddict.com. So I was telling my guest before, and I want to thank last week's guests, Iris and Suzanne from Mini Meds. They were wonderful guests. I should show you next week. Next week, we have Dr. Gratitude is going to be here. She calls herself Dr. Gratitude. Her name is Dr. Farhana Sadek, and she has a new app out with a fellow physician. They're from the UK. It's the Gratitude app, where you can record yourself stating your gratitudes and watch it back, and it's supposed to add more power to your gratitude. And after there's the app. And then the next week, author Gina Hamaday is going to be here talking about her book called I Want to Thank You. And then we've got a bunch of other good stuff coming up that I would love to talk to you about. But I didn't mean to do this now, but this is a quote that I saw in Linda's book, which is a good segue to get her in here. Our topic tonight is resilience. And this quote was at the beginning of one of the chapters of her book. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptive to change. So with that, let me get rid of this. Linda Graham, thank you for being here, Linda.
Thank you for having me, Lauren. We've already talked some. It's such a joy to be here.
I'm totally geeking out over this episode because I feel like you bring so much value to so many, for everybody, really. And I was briefly mentioning before the show, I'm very fortunate that my family, my grown children, my parents, my sister, the whole extended family, a lot of them will tune in certain weeks. And I don't think I've ever done this before, but yesterday I texted all of them and I said, guys, if you can watch tomorrow night, my guest, Linda Graham, is going to be here talking about resilience, because honestly, I cannot think of a single human being other than possibly an infant, well, no, them too, apparently, that can't deal with learning resilience. So it is a pleasure having you. Let me just read your bio quickly. Linda Graham, MFT, is a marriage and family therapist, mindfulness teacher, and expert on the neuroscience of human relationships, who trains other clinicians in applying neuroscience in their work. And she has 2 wonderful books out, one of which we're giving away tonight. Bouncing Back is the first one, and Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and even Disaster. So as you can see from the tabs in these books, I'm a very big fan, and you've agreed to come on with us and talk about, well, resilience in general, but also gratitude and how that leads to resilience. Mm-hmm. So first of all, what is resilience? How would you describe that?
So resilience is usually defined as our capacity to bounce back to baseline whenever there has been a catastrophe, a disaster, a change. And in fact, the rapidity and reliability with which we bounce back to baseline is considered an objective measure of resilience. So I have taught bouncing back and returning to normal, but more and more these days I teach bouncing forward and being able to cope with whatever has happened, but learning the lessons from it and moving forward into a new mindset, into new opportunities, into a new normal. And so resilience basically is our capacities to cope skillfully, effectively, quickly with disappointments and difficulties, challenges and crises, even coping with what's new and what's strange. That is also a form of resilience. And so I, from the neuroscience point of view, talk about resilience as the capacity innate in our brain of response flexibility and being able to pivot and being able to be flexible in how we respond to an external event or to our internal reactions about that event, and being able to respond flexibly in either direction.
That really is kind of the key, isn't it? Is responding flexibly, right? Because I know, there's been situations over the years where I will get kind of paralyzed in a response to something. I can't think of anything offhand, but almost like I don't know how to respond and I don't know how to take it. I'm definitely not an immediate reactor. I usually take a step back and then react. But I think, at least speaking for myself, I think my wish would be to be able to be very resilient very quickly, but I don't know if that's realistic or not.
So very often we will think about resilience as some kind of cognitive capacity to be able to see our options and choose wisely. And there is such a thing as a resilience mindset, and we may talk about that. But one of the first steps of being resilient is being able to regulate your own nervous system so that you can keep your higher brain online, so that you're able to see choices and respond flexibly. And so more and more, I teach a lot of body-based somatic tools to help people regulate their nervous system and come back to that baseline equilibrium as a home base, as a secure base. And from there, they're able to make wiser choices. So that's more and more a part of it. And I also teach the importance of conscious, compassionate connection. Those are foundational to our resilience, to be aware of what's happening and our reactions to what's happening and being able to be conscious of choices, and to have compassion, kindness, acceptance, allowing of what's happening and allowing our reactions to what's happening. And then connection, which is how we do regulate our nervous system. It is how we get resourced to be able to be more resilient. So many, many tools to foster awareness and consciousness, to foster compassion and kindness, to foster connection. Gratitude is one of the tools that could fit under all of those umbrellas. So it is a major player in our being able to be more resilient.
And is that because you feel that gratitude, when we practice gratitude and have a good solid practice, it helps us to put things into perspective a little bit? Yeah.
Yes. And the reason gratitude, or any positive emotion, but gratitude is one of the easiest to practice. The reason it helps us open up to a different perspective is that it actually shifts the functioning of the brain to be able to do that. And negative experiences, negative reactions, negative emotions tend to shrink down the capacity of the brain to respond well. And positive emotions like gratitude tend to shift the functioning of the brain to be more receptive, to be more open. It does lead to bigger perspectives, being able to see things from a different perspective, to be more optimistic. And I love teaching this, that one of the outcomes, one of the direct measurable cause and effect outcomes of gratitude is resilience. That's measurable. So we practice gratitude many, many different ways to bring about that larger perspective. But the foundations of it are really in shifting how our brain functions.
So when I started the group almost 7 years ago, not so much anymore because I think it's getting more into the mainstream, the idea of practicing gratitude. But I got a lot of pushback from people claiming that, that we're ignoring our problems, that we're pushing them under the rug. And that's really not what attitude of gratitude with chronic pain is about. It's actually admitting our problems, coming to a place of acceptance with it, and trying to walk through it with joy. So we're using gratitude as a tool, not as a way to ignore things. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So conscious, compassionate connection. When we practice gratitude, and I love teaching what my teacher, James Barris, teaches, gratitude for everything that is going more than all right. It is not about bypassing or repressing or distracting or rejecting. It is about what I call the ABC model. A is to be aware, to allow, to accept. B is to be with and befriend. C is to have compassion and then curiosity, so that we're able to be with our experience without being caught up in it or caught up in our reactions to it. And being able to, okay, what's the message? What's the lesson? What can I take away from this in a positive way? And tuning into, what are my resources? What are my strengths? How can I meet this? And then being grateful for that. So when we practice gratitude, we're automatically opening up to a larger perspective. Pain will cause us to contract, and we're automatically opening up to a larger perspective to see things from different angles, to be able to reach out to other people who can empathize with our situation, to be able to take risks and try different possibilities. So the gratitude opens us up to what would be called in the resilience world a growth mindset. Being willing to take risks, being willing to deal with a failure, accept it, learn from it, and take a different tack. It opens us up to being able to meet a challenge as an opportunity to grow, what they call an AFGO, another frickin' growth opportunity. And it opens us up to life events in that way. What's the lesson here that I can learn? So gratitude opens us up to that.
That's funny. I just posted, a previous guest actually just wrote a column for Psychology Today that he published last week, Dr. Evan Parks, and he talked exactly what you just said about using stress as a growth opportunity and looking at stress in that way versus a negative thing, which can be really helpful. Just as a reminder for those of you that are just tuning in, first of all, welcome. And we'll take some comments in a minute. But Linda and her publisher have been generous enough. Nope, not this one. This one. Free signed copy of her latest book, Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and Even Disaster. So to win a copy of this, all you have to do is comment in the comments, #gratitude. And in the last couple of minutes, we will draw a winner. So thank you for being here. Okay. Let's take some comments for Linda here. Thank you all for being here. I will try to get to as many comments and questions as you have. Everybody's saying hello. Hello, everybody. So excited to hear about resilience. So I can tell this is such a beneficial broadcast that I shared it on my Facebook page. Thank you, Sarah. Fantastic. Gosh, based on everything you just said, I have so many questions. But so you talked about connection, which obviously is near and dear to my heart. How do you feel that connection helps us with resilience? Other than, does that also help put things in perspective when you're sharing with others? Is that kind of what you mean?
Well, the connections with safe, other trustworthy people are both refuges where we have a chance to kind of drop out and drop in and regroup and gather our own strength and resources again. So people can act as refuges, a kind of timeout and recovering our strength again. And people act as resources. Here's how to do this, or go check out that, or here's what helped me or what worked for me. And so being able to share without any embarrassment, any apology, any shame or regret, being able to share what we're living through, that kind of connection, gives us the refuge and the resource, but it also begins to empower us. I can share, I can learn, I can grow, I can be resilient. So that's part of how connections work. Can I go back to something that you said about stress?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I learned from Kelly McGonigal in her book, The Upside of Stress, that we experience stress when the stakes are high, when something is important to us. And so that's how we can use stress as a marker, as a cue, as a signal to be resilient and fight for what we believe in, because it's of value to us. It has meaning to us. And that's a big part of resilience, is finding meaning and purpose in our lives again, or in our behaviors again. So
the article actually said that same exact thing as well. And never, it makes a lot of sense, but I had never really thought of it before, because obviously we're not going to stress about something that doesn't have much value to us, right?
Right.
This is my Aunt Maureen. Welcome, Linda. Mary, welcome, Linda. Everybody's excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be. Yeah.
Welcome, Linda. I'm so glad you're here. Pamela Craig. People from all over the world that tune. We're very, very fortunate.
Yeah.
So I was mentioning to you before the episode that many of us in the community identify as empaths. And so we love sharing with each other. We have live chats twice a week where you're allowed to share whatever you want. But part of the reason why I started this community was because I was going to other Facebook groups, and while they were very helpful, don't get me wrong, I was taking on the problems of others on top of my own. And so I just wanted a refuge, not necessarily as a replacement, but an oasis of sorts, because it was difficult to take on everybody else's pain as well. So how do you get around that? Like in the group, we want to help others, but we also need to protect ourselves.
Well, I've led support groups and therapy groups for many, many years. And it's important that even when there's sharing and empathy and compassion and support, that the focus remains on coping, on being resilient, on finding our way through, so that people are supported in not just in the pain, but in their efforts to live with the pain or to thrive with the pain. And so it really helps if people, I do teach this a lot. It's not only to learn something that's going to be helpful, but to learn that you can learn. That's part of the resilience mindset, to learn that you can learn, and to get support and validation and reflection of that in a group can be very, very helpful. To see yourself, yes, as someone in pain, yes, as someone who's coping and surviving, yes, as someone who's learning and thriving, and to be able to have that self-narrative around the pain is important also.
And then I find too that sometimes, it makes me feel valuable myself if I'm able to listen to somebody else walk through their struggles and they need a listening ear. I feel, more valuable in my sense of self because I am able to provide that, and they would do the same for me in return. Sometimes there's a fine line between listening, if you, not necessarily anybody in my group, but just in life, everybody knows those certain people that are just constant negative in your ear all the time. And sometimes it can be difficult to escape those kind of people.
Well, I think we do need protection against that kind of negativity. I mean, just saying done. In the post-traumatic growth protocols, it is important to be able to say, this is what happened, and these are the consequences, to be able to be honest and direct about that. And then this is what I did, or this is what I'm doing. And then to claim what strengths we do have, what skills and capacities we do have. And then this is what I would do if I could do it over, or this is what I've learned now to do differently, so that there is a shift toward the learning. There's a shift toward strengthening our capacities. And that's where the gratitude for the learning from the event can come in and be very, very powerful. Yes, this happened. It was horrible. Consequences. It's hard. Here's what I'm learning. Here's the skills I'm developing. Here's the support I've been able to get. I can be grateful for my learning, for my skills, for my support. And that helps us shift our perspective to be more resilient.
So taking that struggle, sharing the struggle, but then turning it into the solution based at the end of it. Say, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'd like to do. Something like that is
right.
productive way.
Yes, and to be able to name, here's the growth I experienced, here's the lessons I learned, here's the new wisdom that I found, being able to say that out loud. And then the last step, and not everybody gets there, but the last step is, here's what I appreciate now because of the event, not in spite of it, because of it, because that's really coming out the other side of the trauma and being able to live in a post-traumatic growth way.
Yeah, that can be difficult with various things. I know with the pandemic, as awful as it has been, and I would never say it wasn't awful, but there were some beautiful things that came into my life, not despite, but because of the pandemic.
And because of our response to the pandemic.
Right. Yeah. You must have been very busy during this pandemic with people trying to be resilient. I mean, talk about resilience. The entire world had to be resilient.
Yes. And I think it opened us up in a way that might have been hard, but we can focus on our own pain and our own needs. And the pandemic gave us a perspective that everybody is suffering. Everybody is in pain. And many people, for many reasons, even more than I am. And so it opened us up to putting our pain, our struggle, our life in the larger context. And that's also something that gratitude can do. When I look at my issues and my struggles, the gratitude opens me up to the larger context. Oh, there are these people who support me. These are these experiences that I get to have. These are these friends that show up for me. So it's a lot about getting that larger perspective, which starts to lean into a spiritual perspective. And in fact, gratitude is a spiritual perspective.
You talk in Bouncing Back, your first book, you talk in the beginning about, how we develop resilience. I was fascinated by your stories of how we develop it, as infants and our self-soothing skills. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? How do we develop it, and then we can rewire our brain, right?
Right. So we do learn resilience from role models and people we see who are resilient and people who can teach us. And we do learn resilience from just being taught skills. But mostly we learn resilience from our own experience. That's how the brain changes. That's how the brain develops its patterns. So the brain develops its capacities for being resilient by experiences where we experience ourselves being resilient. And as we're young and growing up, we learn to regulate our nervous system by our nervous system being regulated by the people around us. And then we learn how to self-soothe. We learn how to manage our emotions by our emotions being managed by the people around us, being seen and accepted and reflected. And then we learn how to manage them. We learn how to see ourselves as worthwhile by other people seeing us as worthwhile. That's all the conditioning that we go through. And we learn to experience ourselves as resilient by our experience and by other people seeing us as resilient and reflecting that back to us. So a lot of what I taught in Bouncing Back and in resilience is what to do when that initial conditioning didn't go so well.
Right.
When those capacities to be resilient didn't develop or didn't fully develop, or they get sidetracked by other strategies that we develop to protect ourselves, defenses that we develop to protect ourselves. And they all serve a purpose. We are here, we survived, but we need to expand our toolbox beyond those initial strategies because we can get stuck in those patterns. And so to be resilient is to have more response flexibility, to have 20 tools in the toolbox.
Right. So we can rewire our brain. I mean, we learn the basics when we're infants, but we do have these tools available to us to build it So if we haven't been historically resilient in, the first half of our lives or whatever, it is something you can develop.
Right. Yes. And we both cultivate specific positive skills to develop resilience. And we also use the positive to rewire the negative, to rewire anything that's keeping us from being resilient. So we're both creating new conditioning, new experiences, new patterns, new learning. But we're also using what we know about the brain to recondition, to rewire. And that is using a positive to antidote or rewire the negative. And very simple examples of that could be if you clench your fist and there can be a certain amount of pain or tension. And then if you open your fist and let it relax, and there's an ease or a comfort. And if you go back and forth so that you rest more in the experience of ease and comfort, you can rewire your brain's processing of the tension and the tightness. And we do that with emotions, where gratitude is so powerful because it's a positive emotion. And when we juxtapose the gratitude with the negativity, yes, there's regret, there's grief, there's fear, there's anger, there's shame, there are negative emotions that we can experience, but the gratitude is a positive antidote. And again, as we said before, not a bypass, not a repression or a distraction, but it is an antidote, even though this is true also, even though this is true also, and it becomes an antidote to the brain's functioning, so that eventually people can hear themselves say inside their own head, run, 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 run. But even so,
right,
I can be grateful about this, or I can be appreciative of that. So we do rewire our automatic responses into new patterns.
I love so many of the tools you talk about in both of your books are things that we do in the group a lot. You talk a lot about mindfulness, which is a big part of our group as well. How does mindfulness help us with resilience?
So I really have come to be a teacher, to be a devotee of mindful self-compassion, because it's both the awareness and the compassion for what we're aware of, so that we can be mindful and aware of what's happening and how we're reacting to what's happening. But it's important to have compassion for how we're reacting. We're human beings.
Right.
This is a normal, natural way to respond, and billions of people on the planet will respond this way. And the compassion is what allows the brain to stay open in its perspective. It's what allows us to say, I accept this, I accept myself. Let me stay open to compassion and curiosity and care. And then I can begin to see what the options are. So a lot of mindfulness is oriented toward be aware and let it go. Be aware and let it go. The compassion is oriented to, yes, it's here. I accept it. I accept myself for having this experience. Now, from a more secure base within myself, I can begin to choose what a wise option would be. So I really think they go hand in hand. Conscious, compassionate connection.
How would you recommend that people go about working on their self-compassion? I mean, you had an example in one of your books here. You talk about the negative self-talk and trying to reframe something like you trip, and you talked about putting your foot in cement, and you said I'm clumsy or something like that. You hear these things fly out of your mouth, may or may not necessarily believe it, but I'm self-deprecating. I'm very self-deprecating. And so you talk about trying to reframe that and recondition yourself to reframe it in the positive, right?
Right. So there's both at an emotional level and then at the cognitive level. So at the emotional level, really, I think the best practice, and we didn't talk about this ahead of time, so I didn't necessarily give you the website, but the mindful self-compassion protocol is just really the best way of being able to be mindful, compassionate, and allowing of what's happening, opening up to the resources of common humanity. So the Center for MSC.org, the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, has many, many, many classes online at this point. And then the books about mindful self-compassion also have really, really good exercises. At the cognitive level, where we're really using the incredible power of our prefrontal cortex, our center of executive functioning, to make decisions and make choices and send our functioning in a different direction. The being able to be aware and present in our body, being able to be mindful and compassionate about our emotions, being able to use other people as refuges and resources, sets us up to be able to become mindfully aware of patterns, aware of reactions, aware of the top 10 tape loops we have in our head, and be able to think of something different. Again, my teacher, James Barris, will teach, what story am I believing now? It's just to look at what story am I telling myself, and is that in my best interest at the moment? And then being able to directly antidote or rewire. So one of the exercises in resilience is, even though I deeply and completely love and accept myself. And that deeply and completely love and accept myself may not feel very believable at first. But if we practice again and again and again, even though I can be grouchy, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. Even though I can be stubborn, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. Over time, when you start to hear the negative self-talk, but I deeply and completely love and accept myself, it starts to come up automatically.
It's almost a meditation, isn't it? Kind of like the Ho'oponopono meditation or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. You also talk a lot about altruism, kindness, and that's something else we talk a lot about in the group, doing service. And it doesn't have to be anything grand. It could be, listening to somebody or writing somebody a quick note. But I loved your second where you talked about altruism and kindness.
So altruism and kindness, I mean, it is important to have self-kindness,
Right.
but altruism and kindness for others gets our focus off ourselves.
Yeah.
And it allows us to experience ourselves as kind and generous and caring. We get to experience ourselves as bigger than our pain, bigger than our struggle. And that's important for being resilient also, to be able to dwell in our larger self, which will be kind and compassionate and generous and wise. We get to live in our larger self and not be contracted in the pain body or in the stress body or in the struggle body. Mm-hmm. We get to not just see ourselves, but live ourselves in a larger fashion. And that is part of our resilience, for sure.
Yeah.
So besides, a daily gratitude practice, many people will have a daily kindness practice and deliberately tracking 5 acts of kindness that I did today, and seeing yourself as a person who can be kind. That helps the resilience.
Perception of self. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Could you state that website one more time, please, Linda? I will put in the after show notes, gang, but what was the website that you mentioned? Mindfulness, self-compassion?
Oh, it's the Center for MSC.org.
Okay, great. Thank you. Pamela Crane says, I have used even though within the EFT protocol. Great.
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Another Linda Kinalikio. Thank you for joining Lauren and all of us tonight. I love listening to all you say. Me too. Me too. You said something, I think, in the beginning of bouncing back, where I think I was shaking my head up and down so hard that my head was going to fly off. But you talk about building resilience, and hanging out with resilient people helps to build resilience. And it makes so much sense.
So if we're hanging out with resilient people, number one, their calmer nervous system is helping to co-regulate our nervous system. So that connection, I mean, that's how we regulate our nervous system, besides our own self-soothing, is being with people we feel safe with and that we feel trusting of. And that's how we regulate our nervous system. I was going to say something else and I just forgot. So what were you saying? And then that may trigger my thought again.
No, I've forgotten what I was going to, what were we talking about?
Oh, being around resilient people.
Yeah.
Okay. So hanging out with resilient people, because if other people are resilient and they see you as resilient, and then you get to see yourself as resilient, that's part of the self narrative. I think it's also important to be able to prune toxic people.
Talk about that.
Okay, so one of the things I teach a lot is the drama triangle, which is an archetype of patterns of how we relate inside our own head or with other people. And the three roles, this comes out of transactional analysis in games people play. So the three roles are to be a victim, a rescuer, or a persecutor. And those roles revolve around each other. And we can get caught in any one of those roles. And we can get caught by people trying to pull us into those roles. And the only way to get out of those triangles is to get out of the triangle. It's to just not play that role. Both to be resilient and not to see ourselves as a victim, but to see ourselves as empowered and having agency, and not being a rescuer and focusing on other people to our own detriment, our own neglect sometimes, and then certainly not being a persecutor, but protecting ourselves from people who might be toxic or persecutory. And it's our birthright as human beings to be able to do that, to set a limit and boundary, to say no, to take an exit. So yes, hanging out with resilient people, for sure, for support, for validation, for the reflection, for the role modeling, and then to set up some boundaries with people who are
detoxify your crown. It can be so difficult, and I know it to be true. I know it to be true. It can be so difficult if somebody's just, if you're a good listener or whatever, and somebody's at you. How do you have any good tips for that? You just have to be tactful and say, "I'm sorry, I can't anymore." Or,
well, I think there's two things. One, well, maybe they go together. Someone can be negative and we can be empathic. And then we can begin to say, and how are you dealing with that? How are you shifting that? How are you solving that? And not to jump too quickly to the problem solving. Yes, to make room for the emotions, to make room for the struggle, but then to not stop there, because resilience is about coping with the struggle.
Right.
So pulling for people's resilience, pulling for their strengths. Tell me how you coped with that, or tell me what you would do next time. It's beginning to cope with that. So helping them shift from negativity to positivity.
So smart. I love that.
And necessary. And, depending, I might do a little didactic, that because we have a negativity bias, which is true, our brains will respond to and hang on to the negative more than the positive. It's an effort, it's an intention, it's a decision to cultivate the positive, which is why a gratitude practice can be so useful. A dedication to this practice can be so useful. So I will sometimes just say to people, you know what? Our brain, I'm not saying your personality, our brain needs to shift out of the negative into more positivity. It's hard work to do that, but it's important to do that right now. So let's try right now. I do tend to be direct, partly because I'm a therapist, so this is what I do with my clients all the time. But I think gratitude is a really effective buffer against that kind of negativity. And I did once have a client who was very, very negative and hard to sit with, and almost out of self-defense. I beginning every session with a 5-minute gratitude free write. And he never told me what he wrote down. I didn't share what I wrote down. It just shifted his energy. And then he was available to do the therapy.
Smart.
So sometimes we just have to directly intervene like that.
So people living with chronic pain and illness, or really any kind of pain, we hold on to our comfort zones very tightly because we don't experience comfort a whole lot. So it can be very difficult to venture out of those comfort zones and put ourselves in situations that may bring us huge blessings, but also may hurt us either physically or emotionally. How can you, is it a matter of finding balance to leave our comfort zones and being willing to get a little bit uncomfortable?
Well, so much learning, so much resilience, so much growth depends on being able to take risks and to try something new. And so to intentionally, consciously practice how and how much can I get out of my comfort zone today? Can I do something for 5 minutes longer than I would normally? Can I call somebody that I haven't talked to in 3 weeks, and can I talk to them once a week? How can I just push that envelope a little bit? I don't mean to go into fear. I don't, because fear will just shut down the resilience. Right. But to plan ways that feel safe to expand the sense of risk or exploration a bit. And sometimes that's, well, let me find someone who will do it with me or help me do it also. Yeah.
That's beautiful. We were talking, that was just reminding me of a conversation we had before we went on the air, where we were talking about finding meaning in your life. And I'd mentioned a couple episodes back about Ikigai, and you had said something very interesting. It was finding meaning in your life brings more happiness than happiness does, right?
Right.
Can you explain that?
So we were saying that external sources of happiness certainly can work. They're not always reliable. They're not always available. What is more available is our own internal sources of happiness. That can be a gratitude practice or a joy practice. But having meaning or purpose is one of those intrinsic causes of happiness. It's something that we own internally. So it just helps shift the focus from looking out there to be happy to looking internally to be happy. So meaning and purpose, the altruism and kindness, the gratitude, there are many ways to cultivate those internal resources of resilience. The mindful self-compassion is another.
But we often can't find those things unless we venture out of our comfort zones at least a little bit, right? Because if we're too busy being comfortable, we can't necessarily find something that might bring us tremendous joy if we don't try.
Then I would perhaps start with, okay, what am I grateful for about my comfort zone? And just go ahead. These are all the things about my comfort zone that I'm so happy about, so grateful for. What a blessing. And to do that practice, I think, will start to spill over. It'll just start to spill over beyond the comfort zone without our even knowing it. And then we can pay attention to that and track that.
This all makes so much sense. You're absolutely wonderful. I just want to remind you guys, we're giving away free signed copy of Linda's book, Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and Even Disaster. All you have to do is in the comments, write #gratitude, and hopefully it will work properly, and we'll have a winner of from our live audience tonight. Thank you for being here. She's with us for another couple minutes. If you have any questions for her, please feel free. She's a wealth of information.
It's true. At this point, I'm a wealth of information and experience. But what really is important is to help people tap into their own wealth of information. Because very often we know things, we don't give ourselves credit for that. We tend to minimize or smallify. So a lot of what I do actually is help people tap into their own intuitive knowing, their own levels of experience, their own willing to risk and try something. So probably more of a facilitator than an expert in some ways, helping people find their own wisdom.
Well, that's what I love about your books. They're both written beautifully in that way. They're very accessible. Make me excited about trying these tools for myself. And we had mentioned before the episode that my group, Attitude of Gratitude with Chronic Pain, isn't really a chronic pain group. It's more of a coping group to build resilience. Right. It's a group that, because we don't discuss our chronic pain, we know it's there, but we don't really discuss it. But we work on tools like everything you're discussing tonight to try to live more meaningful, intentional, joyful, and grateful lives. And that can be difficult. It's like you said, we do default to the negative already, right? Automatically. So it can be difficult to find the good stuff, but the good stuff is there.
So part of cultivating a resilience mindset is cultivating the intention to not default to the negative. We can see ourselves do it and say, I don't want to go there this time. Let me find something positive. And again, not as a bypass, but I think this actually happened after I wrote Resilience. But I was hiking one day with my friend Mariana, and she fell. And she said she heard the crack on the way down. She knew she had broken a bone. And so she lay down on the trail. And the first thing she said was, I need to shift my attitude. That was the first thing she said. So I lay down on the trail with her, and we were looking up at the clouds in the sky, and she just began a gratitude practice.
Wow.
Then we got up. Then she called her husband to take her to the ER.
Oh my goodness.
But we can cultivate that practice to come up fairly automatically. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a resilient woman. You can tell she's friends with you.
Well, and also I'm saying it's a practice. I fell and fractured my shoulder last winter. And on the way down, I knew I was going to hit the concrete. On the way down, thank God it's my left arm and not my right arm, which I need. And then all the way to the hospital, someone was driving me to the hospital. Gratitude that he was there. Gratitude that I had a hospital to go to. Gratitude that I have health insurance. For 2 weeks, almost nothing but gratitude to be able to cope with the pain and the uncertainty and the disability. And then, eventually there was more healing. Eventually I could allow the vulnerability, the grief, the sorrow. But the gratitude was a buffer from being overwhelmed by that.
Wow.
At first.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
So it's so validating, and not that we need the scientific proof or anything like that. For those of us that do it, we know that it works, but hearing it's explained so simply and eloquently and so smartly, and hearing that, it just makes so much sense, and it really feels good. And, I don't have to respond to those people that say it's toxic positivity.
Oh, no. No. That's a term that's just recently been invented. The truth is, we need to reset our negativity set point to more positivity just to get to neutral. Yeah.
Right. It's not toxic. Jill Cook has, she says, stronger because of the PTSD, not simply in spite of it. Thank you, Jill. And I wanted to ask you about trauma, speaking of that, but first, please go ahead.
So I would say, Jill, thank you for the comment. I would say stronger because of my response to the PTSD, my response to the event. Yes, there is an event. Yes, trauma happened, PTSD happened, but it was my response that now I can be grateful for the event, for the trauma, for the learning. Now I'm in a better place. So I think it's in that framework of the event happened, how I responded, how I learned has brought my life to a new place. And that's what we can be grateful for.
It really is all about the response, isn't it? It's not the event. And that's actually what I was going to say with Jill's comment, the PTSD, talking about trauma. And you talk about trauma in bouncing back, how a lot of us, I did really think of trauma as an event, but trauma is not the event, right?
So let's say in the field at first, trauma was defined as an event that overwhelmed our coping mechanisms. And there was capital T trauma like war or rape that would overwhelm anybody. And then there was small t trauma like being afraid of being stuck in an elevator or going to the dentist, which bothers some people, but not everybody. But the field has changed, and that's partly because of the neuroscience, partly because of the brain science that shows us how the brain responds to trauma and what we need to do with the brain to come back out of trauma. And so now the focus is on our internal response to the event, because that's where we have some choice and some change. And one of my colleagues, Frankie Perez, says, how you respond to the issue is the issue. That's really how we can avoid trauma and how we can recover from trauma, is by paying attention to our own reactions, our own responses, our own choices. Yeah.
And living with chronic pain can be traumatic, right? If we allow it to be. Is that basically what you're saying?
Well, chronic pain is traumatizing.
Yeah.
And how we choose to live with that trauma, how we choose to live with ourselves because we have that trauma, how we learn to frame ourselves as, I have chronic pain and that's not the entire story. Right? That's one of the things they talk about in post-traumatic growth, that the trauma happens, it is part of the story, it is part of the narrative, but it is not the entire story. We have a story larger than that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely the message that I try to send out to people. And with mindfulness-based stress reduction, they talk about focusing on what is not in pain, right? Rather than what is in pain, doing body scan meditations and things like that. But it's not the full story. Yes, I live with a chronic condition, but I'm not just going to call it a day and say I live with a chronic condition. I did that once. It didn't work out very well for me.
So let me say this about that. When you're talking about MBSR and being able to be aware of places in your body that are not in pain. So somatic experiencing trauma therapy is built on the idea of pendulation, that we know we carry trauma in our body. We know, we hope there are places in our body that do not carry the trauma, which may be our elbow or our earlobe or our big toe. And we pendulate back and forth so that the positive, the ease, the calm, the pain-free eventually can begin to rewire our experience of the pain or our response to the pain, because we have a place that we can inhabit that is not in so much pain. So that, again, the juxtaposition of opposites, the juxtaposition of the positive with the negative, is how we do that rewiring. Yeah.
It's very comforting to know that we have these tools available to us to develop, these things. You have so many great tools that you're sharing with us. Heidi, the names of the two books, the one we're giving to it today is this one, Resilience, Linda Graham, and then the first one is Bouncing Back. And they're both on Amazon. You can find them. Let me give her website again. Where's the banners? There it is, Linda Graham -mft.net. You can find out all about Linda. She offers courses, books. You've got all sorts of things going on. You have wonderful, I shared one of your short videos in the group last night. It was an interview you had done with positive psychology, I think, and talking about gratitude and reframing all of this stuff. You have so much great things to say.
Many of the exercises that are in both books are on the website. They're available in blog format, but many of them are available free to download, free to use.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I haven't mentioned that. Both of these books are chock full of exercises, you guys. They're wonderful, wonderful books. This was the first one I got, which is your more recent one. And then I loved it so much. I don't know which one I love better, because Bouncing Back has some great things too. But yes, Heidi, we're giving away this one tonight. If you'd like to win a copy, we still have a couple more minutes. #gratitude. There's my alarm there. One of the challenges we're doing in our journal, we have a journaling club, and one of the challenges we're doing in November is a thank you note club where we're writing thank you notes to people in November. And you had an exercise in the back of one of your books where you talked about a class. They weren't being very nice to each other, right? And the teacher had them like write something nice about another one.
Right. This actually happened in an elementary school classroom quite a while ago now. It is now used in classrooms throughout the country, where the kids in this 5th grade elementary classroom were acting up, talking, walking around the room, throwing spitwads. And the teacher had just had enough. And she said, everybody stop, just stop. Take out a piece of paper, write down the name of every student in this class on the left-hand side of the paper, and then write down one positive comment about every student in the class. So they did that. She took them home, cut and pasted them. So the next morning, every student had their own piece of paper with 25 positive comments about them. It was life-changing for the students. The story goes on, because this did happen quite a while ago. The story goes on that one of the students was killed in the Vietnam War. At the memorial service, the father came up to the teacher. I cry usually when I tell this story.
I know.
The father came up to the teacher and pulled out the piece of paper and said they found it in the pocket of his uniform the day he was shot. And another student walked up and pulled out her piece of paper and said, I've carried this in my purse every day for 10 years. Wow. So that exercise is now taught. I taught it at a workshop and got the feedback from a participant who said, one year we didn't have any money, no money for Christmas presents. So mother just said, write a card to everybody in the family saying what you appreciate about them. And she said, that was the first time I really knew my brother loved me.
Oh my goodness.
So this expressing kindness and appreciation to other people changes lives. It just changes our sense of who we are. And it can change our sense of self for doing it. So
yeah, sometimes we don't know how people feel until they tell us, and that is a powerful story. Thank you for sharing that.
Right.
Just a couple more, and then we actually have to go. My mother loves the gratitude buffer technique. Pamela Creighton says, I've used the tools you suggested of shifting someone out of loading their negativity without success. Other than limiting my exposure, have you any other suggestions, please?
So there is something very important called theory of mind, which basically is I am I and you are you, and we have different opinions and different emotions, and that's okay. So to be able to distinguish, you're who you are, not me. That's not me. One of my other teachers, Phil Moffitt, talks about being affected without being infected. We can listen and care, but we don't have to take on what somebody else is experiencing. We just don't have to take it on. We're a separate person and we have our own thoughts and feelings, and that's okay. So that's sometimes the boundary about being an empath. It's to listen, to care, but not take on somebody else's feelings as though they were our own, because then we can get infected. Yeah.
Infected. I like that. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to give away a free book. Thank you, everybody, for who entered. Let me try to get this up here. There we go. Here we go. Good luck, everybody. Who's going to win it? Seton Silver won. Elizabeth Silver, thank you. Wonderful. You are a lucky woman. This is a fantastic book. Again, the book is Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment and Difficulty and Even Disaster. Again, you can find Linda on her website at lindagraham-mft.net. Linda, you are so delightful. I would love to have you back someday because I feel like I could pick your brain for 6 more hours. You're so helpful.
We can talk about that, Lauren. It's a delight to work with you. Yeah.
Thank you. It's really delightful to have you here. And I really appreciate you giving us this hour of things to work on. Very helpful. So,
may it serve. May it serve.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for tuning in live. And for those of you watching the replay, thank you as well. I will see you next week. Peace and love, gang. Bye.